Well, John, here we are again with our second episode of the Infinite Chapter. How did you feel after the Musashi discussion went out into the world?
Honestly, I was thrilled. It was amazing to connect our listeners with that story of discipline and inner strength. It gave me the sense that this podcast could really become a space for thoughtful conversations about books.
Same here. I kept thinking back to our conversation and how intense it felt to unpack Musashi's world. It left me eager to see how shifting to a completely different kind of story would challenge us in new ways.
Exactly, and that's the best part. Now we get to continue the journey with a completely different kind of book, Lord of the Flies.
Wow, a sharp contrast indeed. From samurai honor to children unraveling on a deserted island. It really shows the variety of worlds we want to explore here. But before we dive into the story itself, maybe we should talk a little bit about the person who imagined it.
Good idea. Understanding the man behind Lord of the Flies helps explain why the book took this particular shape. William Golding, born in 1911 in England, was a man deeply marked by war. As a young man, he studied English literature at Oxford, but his life changed radically when he served as a naval officer during World War II. He took part in missions in the Atlantic and the Mediterranean, witnessed the Normandy landing, and experienced firsthand the violence of war. That experience convinced him that evil was not an accident, but a constant in human nature, and that trauma permeates all his literary work.
So, when he wrote Lord of the Flies in 1954, he wasn't writing from academic theory, but from direct experience of the worst of ourselves.
Exactly. In fact, the novel was conceived as a kind of antidote to idealistic juvenile tales like The Coral Island. There, children thrived with innocence and cooperation. Golding, however, decided to turn that paradigm around and ask, what happens if shipwreck is not adventure, but collective tragedy?
And the most disturbing thing is that over time, his vision has proved far more realistic than those optimistic fables. Okay, let's set the scene for the audience. What happens in this story?
A group of British boys is stranded on a deserted island after a plane crash. Without adults, they try to organize themselves with the illusion of maintaining some discipline. Ralph is elected leader and tries to maintain order, supported by Piggy, who symbolizes rationality and logical thought. Jack, on the other hand, becomes obsessed with hunting and soon becomes embodied by violence and the primitive instinct.
And that tension between them begins to fracture the group very early on. Some boys feel drawn to Jack's authority and the power of violence, while others try to hold on to the hope of rescue.
Exactly. And the conch shell, which at first functions as a symbol of order and democracy, gradually loses its power as irrational fears take over. Piggy is brutally killed. Simon, the most visionary and sensitive, is sacrificed in a savage ritual that marks the point of no return. The Lord of the Flies, a pig's head on a stake covered in flies, becomes a totem of fear and superstition, a mirror of the children's inner darkness.
The most striking thing is that it all ends with an abrupt rescue, but by that time, it doesn't matter. Innocence was shattered, and the experience had revealed how far human nature can descend when rules collapse.
Golding builds an allegory in which each character embodies a facet of human nature and also interacts with others, generating tensions and synergies. Ralph represents civilization and democratic leadership, but his fragility emerges when he faces Jack's savage charisma. Piggy embodies reason and logical thought. His relationship with Ralph is one of constant support, although his physical weakness makes him the target of mockery, underlining how intelligence without social strength is marginalized. Jack, for his part, symbolizes the thirst for power and the primitive instinct. His clash with Ralph is not only personal, but the confrontation between democratic authority and the dictatorship of fear. Simon introduces another dimension, spiritual intuition and empathy. His isolation and tragic end show that truth and sensitivity can be crushed by collective frenzy.
So they're not just children, they are mirrors of what we all are, and their relationships form a map of the eternal tension between reason, power, faith, and civilization.
Exactly. The omniscient narrator guides us through that transition, from order to chaos, showing how each character pulls the group toward a different destiny. And everything is reinforced with symbols: the conch shell as law, the fire as hope, the mask as loss of identity. Golding's style is sober, almost clinical, which makes the rawness hit harder.
It's almost like a social experiment narrated live.
Exactly, and that's what makes it so disturbing. Golding places us as observers of a laboratory where human nature is tested without filters. We see how the initial organization degrades step by step and how individual tensions become collective dynamics impossible to stop. It's as if he's telling us, look closely, because this island is not so far from what happens in our own society.
Come on, Jon, give us those little hidden gems.
The title, for example, Lord of the Flies, is a translation of Beelzebub, a demon associated with chaos. Another, the novel was rejected several times before being published, and when it finally came out, it sold poorly. There's even a story that one editor dismissed it as rubbish and dull, which shows how close this masterpiece came to never seeing the light of day. Golding later joked about how ironic it was that a book about chance and survival almost didn't survive publishing itself.
Cannot be true.
Another interesting detail, the conch shell was inspired by real Caribbean shells that Golding had seen in natural history collections. He wanted an object that felt both exotic and ceremonial, something a child could believe held power. And in one of the earliest drafts, the boys were much older teenagers, but Golding changed them to school children because he thought their innocence would make the descent into savagery even more shocking.
Really? And today it's required reading in half the world?
Exactly! It also has film adaptations, although heavily criticized for softening the violence. And here's another thing. Golding always said he did not believe in the innate goodness of human beings, which put him directly at odds with Rousseau's ideas.
That explains a lot about the tone of the novel. But tell me, Jon, how does Rousseau fit into this? Didn't he argue that human beings are good by nature and that society corrupts them?
Precisely. Rousseau believed that in the natural state, we are noble and pure beings, and that social structures corrupt us. Golding, however, proposes the opposite, that when norms collapse and authority disappears, goodness does not arise but violence. The island works as a brutal counterargument to the Rousseauian vision.
So, Lord of the Flies is in part a literary discussion with Rousseau.
Yes, and the interesting thing is that the debate remains alive. We still ask ourselves whether evil is innate or learned, and Golding firmly places himself on the darker side of that question. At first it went unnoticed, but over the years it became a classic of the 20th century. Today it's studied in schools and universities.
And not only in literature. I've seen it cited in debates about politics, psychology, even in series like The Simpsons.
Yes, the powerful thing is that it continues to function as a universal metaphor for social fragility. Every time civilization seems to falter, we return to Lord of the Flies.
And that makes it eternal and terrifying. But I wonder, Jon, what does a reader really take away from this novel? What is the deepest lesson it leaves us as human beings?
I would say the novel forces us to confront the discomfort of our own nature. We learn that civilization is a fragile veneer and that without rules and limits, we can fall into barbarism faster than we think. But it also offers us a warning. If we understand that fragility, we can better protect our institutions, our communities, and our empathy.
So, the learning is not only pessimistic. It's as if Golding were saying, look at your shadow, but don't ignore it, because recognizing it is the only way to control it.
Exactly. The reader takes away an uncomfortable mirror, but also a call to individual and collective responsibility.
Now, Jon, your verdict.
For me, it's an uncomfortable but essential novel. It reminds us that the boundary between civilization and barbarism is razor thin. And the most disturbing thing is that it doesn't speak of others, it speaks of us.
I'd say it's a book that stays on your skin. You close it, but the question remains, which part of me is Ralph? And which part is Jack?
And that discomfort is its greatest legacy.
Well, that's it for this episode of The Infinite Chapter. If it stirred you as much as it did us, share it and leave us your comments. And don't be shy. Send us your book suggestions. We'd love to hear what stories you want us to explore next.
Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter. Each week, a different book, a new conversation. You can find us on both Spotify and YouTube, and your support there is crucial for helping us keep this project alive.
See you in the next Infinite Chapter.
See you soon.